Hi, everybody. My name is Katie Weaver, and this is going to be my biogeochemistry presentation on elemental cycles. And I decided to do it on petroleum extraction. Um, the reason I chose petroleum extraction specifically and not combustion is because I feel like all I've ever really heard, at least in my personal experience, is constant talk and discussion around combustion and vehicles, oil, trying to shift from combustion vehicles to electric or hybrid vehicles. And so I feel like I never really got a background in petroleum extraction processes until this point in my life. And I just thought it was really fitting for me to kind of present that. And while I present petroleum extraction processes and its biogeochemical coupling effects on Earth, I'm going to dive deep into specifically the carbon and water cycle processes. So I'll talk about those two, and then I'll kind of put those two things together and talk about how it affects climate change. So let's go ahead and get started. Um, Give me a second. I'm a little bit terrible with technology, a little bit of an old lady inside. So here we have my first few negative coupling effects of petroleum extraction on carbon cycling. And I just started off really simple, nice and basic, because personally I like to start with a good foundation of understanding and then kind of expand on it and then put all the complicated stuff together. So we're going to start off with the first coupling effect. We are going to look at bare minimum petroleum extraction processes out of the earth contributes to the release of carbon entering the atmosphere. Nice and basic, right? And then as we move on to the next coupling effect, we are going to see that when we go to areas for extraction of petroleum and oil and gas, we are going to be contributing to a massive loss of soil and vegetation in those areas. So we're gonna look on the left here and we're gonna see loss of soil and vegetation for petroleum extraction causes specifically changes in carbon storage. Not cute and not fun. So we're gonna go ahead and take a look at that. So when I refer to carbon storage, obviously we know we exhale carbon dioxide, plants intake it, and we get our oxygen from them. And with the loss of soil and vegetation in those areas, it definitely adds up over time. And that's why we're going to see some changes in carbon storage with the loss of vegetation. And then we're going to look to the right. We see that little circle indicating that it's a negative coupling effect. And we're going to see the release and buildup of carbon from plants, vegetation, soil from the surrounding areas begins to enter the atmosphere, causing carbon buildup. And then we're going to keep going, and then we're going to see, once again, starting from the bare minimum effect, or extracting petroleum leads to local changes in those surrounding areas of microbial activity that release and consume carbon. And the way I like to think of microbial activity is little baby microorganisms under the ground that are feeding off of carbon in the petroleum and its surrounding areas. I have my little notes here. When I first wanted to dive into understanding microbial activity a little more, I looked it up and it said microbial activity traps CO2 within soil and helps with the decomposition processes of organic matter. And I saw this great little diagram of like the roots of the soil and then the grass and then the plant, and it just had like little carbon. So that diagram, if you can picture it with me describing it, is a great way of imagining the little carbon cycle of like surrounding vegetation and soil. And so when we extract that to pull out petroleum, we're going to go ahead and follow the negative coupling effect, and we're going to see a release of variations of carbon entering the atmosphere, because now we're going to see that those microorganisms in the soil and underground surrounding the petroleum, with them kind of leaving the circumstances, leaving that situation, we're going to see that little chain be changed, I guess you could say. And then carbon's going to be more so released rather than consumed and cycled out in that surrounding area. And so that's it for the carbon cycle. And we're going to move on to my part 2 of the carbon cycle diagram. I kind of decided to put everything together, and we're going to start from the bottom up. We're going to look at underground petroleum extraction, and then I decided to put it like 3 ways and then kind of just like let it go to the atmosphere. So we're going to start off at the left, and we're going to see, like I said previously, most bare minimum extracting petroleum causes a release of carbon. Then we're going to go to the right. We're going to see a loss of soil and vegetation leads to changes in carbon storage and releases it. And then we're going to go to the right, see changes in microbial activity leads to either the release or various consumptions of carbon underground. And then I kind of put this little surrounding area right here, which said like microbial consumption. And when I refer to consumption, I kind of just mean like that little cycling. Maybe that's not the right term for it. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it's because the way I researched it and understood it was that there was like fluctuations in microbial activity. I would love to dive deeper onto that. Please, if I'm wrong, correct me. I would love to hear it. And that's why I kind of put that there. And then we're going to see that variation of microbial carbon release going up. And then we're going to see all of these carbon releases entering the atmosphere. And don't forget all those little circles that connect the boxes are indications of a negative coupling effect. So that's for the carbon cycle. Nice 3 things to get us started. And then we're going to move on to the water cycle. Now, with the water cycle, I also started off really nice and simple as well to kind of get into the fundamentals of understanding these things. I'm going about this as if like I was explaining it to me when I was new to all of this. So we're going to start off over here at the left once again. We're going to see that petroleum extraction and the use of fracking. And I really wanted to touch on fracking. I found it really interesting because I've heard that term a lot here and there, and I never really kind of fully grasped what it was. But fracking is basically injecting a certain liquid at high pressure to release those fissures of like leftover, like I guess you could say leftover oil and gas compositions underground. Basically, like the best way I can put it is like when you're using toothpaste and you're like really trying to squeeze every bit of that toothpaste out because you don't want to waste any. Basically, that's what fracking is for petroleum. Okay. And unfortunately, with fracking, that contaminates local water and groundwater. And so we're going to move to the right. We're going to see that negative coupling effect. And then we're going to scroll down and we're going to see petroleum extraction and potential spills, leaks in pipelines, tanks, and rigs. I remember a few years ago, they shut down a pipeline when Biden came into office, shut down a pipeline, I believe in Alaska. Correct me if I'm wrong. I have a really bad memory for pipeline purposes. And then we're going to go to the right and we're going to see water contamination and changes in local ecosystem, biodiversity, and wildlife contamination. So we're going to put these together as well. We're going to scroll down and we're going to see contamination of oh wait, scratch that. We're going to start from the bottom again. So like I said, start from the bottom, go up. We're going to start down here with petroleum extraction, and then we're going to go to the left again. We're going to see spills and leaks of pipelines, tanks, and rigs. Go to the right, use of fracking for extraction. We're going to go up, and we're going to see ultimately contamination of water, runoff areas, groundwater. They all become contaminated. And then the kicker, we're going to go up the chain, and we're going to see that all of these negative coupling effects massively affect this coupling effect right here. And we're going to see a contamination of ecosystems, wildlife, biodiversity. And I will touch on this later on. Also, when plants take in water, they become contaminated and suffocate. Very sad. And I will share a fun fact. plants actually release frequencies when they don't feel good. Fun fact. So yeah, and then my favorite part of this presentation is when I put it all together. Um, so I combined the carbon H2O cycles with petroleum extraction. And like we did before, we're going to start all the way at the bottom because I found it really interesting that I'll get to it. But basically, these two really do work together for climate change. And I just find that so interesting. I don't think I can get enough of that information. So we're going to start at the bottom, petroleum extraction, and we're going to follow the negative coupling effects. And I would like to touch that while I made these diagrams, I didn't really find equilibrium points in my coupling effects, and that's why you just see negativity all over these diagrams. Really unfortunate. So we're going to start at the left, and I decided to put land and water together, and then we'll see that atmosphere is on top. Basically combining all of Earth's systems and touching on the basics of carbon and water cycles. So petroleum extraction, start at the left, land. The loss of soil and vegetation, changes in microbial activity, release carbon, affects carbon storage, right? And then when we look to the right and we see water, we're going to see oil spills, fracking, contaminate the water, the local water that contributes to groundwater and runoff, and then affects larger areas of ecosystems. And we're going to see that wildlife is affected. And I kind of put the altering of carbon storage in plants from taking a contaminated H2O in the middle here, because they kind of take it in together. Like we said before, one thing often affects the other thing. And when we see water, contaminated water, and those local ecosystems and areas, when the leftover, let's say leftover surrounding vegetation and soil from the vegetation they didn't take out, takes in that contaminated groundwater up the stomata, and the plant unfortunately suffocates and basically chokes on that contaminated water, which is really sad. And plant dies, changes in carbon storage, releases carbon, and then organic matter just, really sad. And then we're going to go to the atmosphere, and we're going to see that these three things that all coincide and work together are going to affect the atmosphere and carbon buildup. Very unfortunate. And then we're going to see that with carbon buildup in the atmosphere, there are changes in precipitation levels and climate change. Very, talk about it all the time. So yeah, and I just found this, for me, really interesting, because when I think of carbon buildup in the atmosphere and carbon contributions, I really don't hear changes in precipitation. I don't think about how carbon in the atmosphere affects precipitation or the water cycle. And so when I was kind of diving deep into this, I learned that, and that's honestly been my favorite fact about the whole situation that I've dug up here. And that's why I put those little arrows down, because it just kind of tells you that climate change and alterations in precipitation is going to kind of have this little cycle going on here of water and land and atmosphere, and it's just gonna do its thing, be contaminated, change the climate, and yeah. And so those are my 5 pages of diagrams of negative coupling effects. And like I said, I didn't really find any equilibrium or positive points in coupling effects in my little study I had here. So yes, but let's go ahead and stop sharing. I do hope all of you found this interesting. I honestly had a really good time learning about all of this and kind of growing my understanding, especially the precipitation aspect of carbon in the atmosphere and climate change. So yes, all of y'all have a great rest of your semester.